Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining me today on the AgentXcel podcast. And today I'm doing a solo show. I'm going to do a show on systems for the solo agent. And I recently was talking to a friend of mine, a buddy who sells real estate, been selling for about a year and a half and does really good production. And he had said something to me. He said, "Hey, Chris, I think sometimes when you're talking to people, you can be unrelatable, just with how many people you have helping you right now." And I really sat down and thought about that. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do a show about how I built systems, 17 years ago as a solo agent and what I did to build upon those over the years and how I got to this point just through systems. So I hope you guys enjoy the show. So today's show, I want to talk about being a solo agent and having systems. I was recently talking to one of my buddies who's a realtor, and he had told me, he said, "Hey, Chris, you're a little bit unrelatable when you're teaching people sometimes." And I was a little bit taken back by that, but then I started to think about it and I'm like, yeah, maybe I am. So he's been selling real estate for about a year and a half and he sold about 32 transactions his first year. And that's amazing. I think my first year I sold like 6 homes. So the fact that he sold 32 is just incredible. And so when he said you're unrelatable, though, I sat back and I thought, you know what, maybe I am. Because when I talk to or teach, solo agents, they'll sometimes be like, "I know, but you've got like, a transaction coordinator and you got someone in your office." And, it's always like, "Oh, well, you have that." And I do. So right now my business is set up where I've got a transaction coordinator, or I should say an office manager. I got an office manager who handles all my transaction coordinating, my bills, manages my 20 rental properties that I own. And then I've got Kylie who handles, the podcast, marketing, more of my, personal stuff in life. And then I've got, obviously my wife, she's the co-CEO. She does a lot that would be on my plate. And then I've also got a showing partner that I pay salary that shows homes for me. So when he said I was unrelatable, I thought, do you know what? Maybe I am. But I wanted to make this podcast because I wanted to take people back to 17 years ago on, how this grew, and it grew through systems. So this is going to be, systems for the solo agent. I want to go over some of the, I've always been, systematic. I've always had more of an analytical brain. As I started selling more and more real estate, I had to let that analytical side of me go. I used to be the guy that would want to sit in the office all day long, just work on spreadsheets or marketing. I'd always want to work and tinker on things in my business before I'd go out and actually find business. It was, one day I finally realized that trait wasn't going to, build my company. And even though I still have that in me, I have to let that go a lot of days and I have to let other people do it. But I was always a systems person. So what I want to go over now is 17 years ago, what I did. And now the mechanism you use is going to be up for debate. So whether you're going to use spreadsheets, you're going to use the system like Asana, or you're going to use systems like Trello. That's what you've got to decide. It's the same conversation as like when we're talking about CRMs. Every realtor uses a different CRM, and it doesn't make any difference. Like, just get your people in there and use it, and it's going to work for you. It's kind of the same thing with systems. Now, that's more of a personal preference. It's what one do you feel comfortable with? But I started building my initial systems on spreadsheets. Then as we grew, now we use a lot of spreadsheets, but then we also use, like, Kylie and I communicate a lot through Trello. That's Trello. That's Trello.com. That's how we keep track of some projects that we work on. And then, and then my office, Christy, she uses Asana, Asana.com. Those are our checklists for new listings, new buyer clients, pendings, our rental properties and what we've got to do. But those are checklists for like a file. So, but what do you use is up for debate. So I just want to go back and say 17 years ago, I started on spreadsheets. So this is a show for you this is a podcast for you to sit back and say, wow, could I be more systematic? Like, if I'm doing something all the time, could I have it in some type of system where I'm not having this all memorized? And so we're going to start off with my deal spreadsheet. That was one of the very first spreadsheets that I made, and it's called deal spreadsheet. So in our office, I mean, if you look in our Google Drive, we've got them back from 2005, and it's just every single year we have a deal spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet, it basically has a column for and I'm not going to get all of this right off memory, but you'll get the idea. But it has a column on the spreadsheet for the closing date, the name of the client, the address, the co-broke, the full commission. And then here's the cool part is we start breaking down all these columns because the full commission will be in there. So it's date, client name, or it's closing date, client name, and then it's commission percentage, our full commission. And then we start breaking it down. Then it's like, what's our brokerage going to get? Do you have any franchise fees that you've got to pay, a transaction coordinator fee that you've got to pay? Do you have an ISA you've got to pay, a showing partner you got to pay? Then finally you get to the last column as far as the finances are concerned, and it gets to company net, and company is me. So like, for example, on one of my spreadsheets, it's going to say like the closing date, let's say April 15th, Larry's the client. It's going to say the commission that I'm making off that deal is 2.8%. And then it's going to say, also it has the sales price. So it has a sales price, then the commission. Then it's going to say that commission total is, let's just say $16,000. Then it's going to say, this is what my brokerage gets. This is, if there's a franchise fee for your company, there's not for mine, but if there's a franchise fee for your company, you put it there. And you just keep E&O. What you're trying to do is you're trying to see at the end what you actually made off this transaction. Company dollar, like what are you bringing into the company? Now, there's a lot of expenses on your P&L and stuff that you're going to have that are going to come out of that. But like that's overall like what you're making off of the deal. And then after that, we keep going and we've added these columns over time, but we have lead source. So we put in there, it's a lead source, and it can say like pay-per-click. It can say, open house, or it could say expired. What we do is if it's a referral, we actually put the name of the person who referred us. So if we go through that column and see people's names, that's the name of the person that referred us. And then we have a column for listing and a column for buyer. And if it's a listing, we put a 1 in that column, and if it's and we put a 0 in buyer. And the next column, if it's a buyer, we put a 1 in the buyer column and a 0 in listing. That's so that can tab at the very bottom. It can tell you how many listings and how many buyers you're doing. And then it'll say, what title company did we use? What lender did we use? So right there, that was probably one of the very first spreadsheets that I ever created 17 years ago, because I wanted to know, I wanted to look at one spot and see not just who my clients were, but I wanted to see, that's a lot of data points. It's not only, how many pendings do I have? I can see my cash flow situation on how much, money's coming through the door company. I can see how much I've paid my broker at any time. I can see how much I've paid in E&O. I can see all the lead sources if I ever wanted to. So it's just a very, and here, most people would say, hey, Chris, I use some type of system with my brokerage, like, SkySlope or Dotloop or whatever's out there. I could just go in there and see all my pendings, and that's good. And you've got to do that. That's what your brokerage needs you to do, but you've got to build things now for you. So your brokerage is always going to have things that you've got to do to communicate with them. You need to have things internally that you can look at so you can make decisions on what you need to do next. But that's called the deal spreadsheet. And every year I make a new deal spreadsheet. And so I could go back right now and just look from, I think 2005 is when I got into real estate. I could look at each one of those spreadsheets and see all the clients that I worked, source of business, how much I made that year. It's pretty cool because I looked at like one year, it was like the short sale era where we were selling houses for like $85,000. And I think I closed like 39 units one year. And I looked at like what I made, and it was like 120,000. And don't get me wrong, that's good money. I make a lot more now. But I think what was noticeable is how, what that showed me was volume, meaning the unit game was good. And I think I closed 39 units. But like if you close 39 units right now in Arizona, you'd be making, I think, like probably $700,000. So it just showed you how low of houses we were selling. So our volume was so low. But that was the first spreadsheet. So once again, when people say, or this person said, hey, Chris, you're a little bit unrelatable. I want to go back and just point out, like, that's how I started. So like when I would put a deal together, I would put it on that spreadsheet, and then it just grows from there. Maybe you'll add specific columns for you and how your business works, but that's the first spreadsheet I would make. And I'm telling you, that'll take you all of probably 12 minutes to make, to just make headers that say closing date, name of client, address, purchase price, co-broke, full commission, break down all the columns that your company has for pay or how your structure works, get to the end, company net, just minus those out, you get to a company net, lead source, listing or a buyer, lender, title company, done. Take you 12 minutes, put it on there. Also, why I like this is because I talk to a lot of agents. I do a lot of like coaching, slash consulting with agents, and we talk about their money. And, I'll ask like, oh, how much have you made this year? And they're like, oh, I don't really know. Or it's like, hey, how much did you pay your brokerage this year? I don't really know. And I'm like, that should be something that, I mean, the first spot you look at when that question's asked, like that should be your scoreboard. Like, could you imagine if we were playing a football game and there's no scoreboard out there? Like you have no sense of urgency. You don't know what down it is. I know I use that analogy all the time, but I use it because it's so like clear that if we were watching a football game Sunday night and you're sitting on the couch and there was no clock or no scoreboard, like that would be the most boring game. The time, how long somebody has on the field and what the score is what creates the urgency. It's where we get that excitement for watching the game. So that was the first one, deal spreadsheet. Now let's go to the next one. Next one would be like a buyer spreadsheet. And so, like I said, we use some different things now for this, like Asana.com, but you could just use a simple spreadsheet so that you aren't spending money. And so what a buyer spreadsheet is a new buyer spreadsheet. So what we're trying to do is I did this, and you got to think I was an analytical brain. I still am. So this stuff was built. So when I hired an assistant, they plugged and played into what I had built. And I just told them, hey, there's your baseline. Like now they've built more things into these systems and they run a little bit differently than I would run them today if it was me. But like I brought them into a system that was working, and then they just took over. And now I don't do anything with them, but I did build most of them. But the new buyer spreadsheet is, I sat down one day and thought, okay, well, if I get a new buyer, what do I do every single time? Schedule buyer consultation, send them a note card thanking them for coming to the consultation, set up portal, like set up a home portal, set up a home search. That's maybe not a lot of things. Maybe that's only 3 or 4 things that you do for somebody, because after that, you're just going to show them homes. But that's a system. Like that's when you get a new buyer. So you could have, and maybe this is one spreadsheet that you have with just tabs at the bottom. And one tab is, deals. And then you go to the next one where you've got like your master spreadsheet. Like, so when you do, like if you're going to do something every single day, or you're going to do something every week or every month, you should have a system for it. And people think systems are like, like they've got to get something like groundbreaking or revolutionize this thing. And it's like, it's just, what do you do in the process? And the point of doing this is, and why I did it, is because my brain it's very simple. And so I would, let's say you have 3 and 4 buyers. Let's say you have 3 or 4 listings. I never wanted to be driving down the road and my brain to be thinking like, okay, like, did I order the photos on that property? Oh, have I got the seller disclosures from that client? Oh, wait, like, did I send in the repair list or the Benzer? Did I send that in? That's something that like, I don't like that feeling. So like, I don't get that feeling anymore. And I did when I first started. I don't have that feeling because I can rely on my spreadsheet. So if I don't even think about that stuff before I go to bed or when I wake up or when I'm in the car at a red light. I know, hey, I could just go look at my spreadsheet and look at that. And I've got a time allotted. I did have a time allotted every day where I looked at that spreadsheet, and that's what I did. So let's go. This one probably makes more sense. It's like a new listing checklist. So every single time you take a listing, you do a certain set of activities. You order photos, you put a lockbox on the house, you order a for sale sign. Maybe you get flyers at the house. Maybe you set up open houses. You put it on the MLS. There's a list of things that you do. So here's what I would say you start with when you start making these lists. First, think from the standpoint of, what does my brokerage need, right? Think from that standpoint. Like, what do they need? We've got to get that stuff done. Then think of like, what do I have to do at the house? Like lockbox, sign. Then think of like, what do I have to do in my office behind the scenes? And then what you want to do, and this is where it's cool, because this is where you start building a really cool business that does have some secret sauce to it, is you start adding your own flair to it. You start adding things that only you would do, because like what you have to upload to your brokerage is the same for every agent in your brokerage. What you have to do at the house, probably the same, lockbox, sign, things like that. Now start adding in things in the transaction where like, hey, that's my special thing. Like maybe there's a note that you send out whenever you list a property to them. You put that on the checklist. Let's say maybe after the appraisal, you go put boxes at their house with a letter that's like, hey, we're past the appraisal, it's time to start moving, and just a few boxes, just a kind gesture. Let's say maybe for, like a buyer pending checklist, like at the end, it would be putting ordering a doormat with their last name on it. Well, if that's something you do every single time you're in a transaction, that would be on your new buyer a pending buyer checklist, so that you don't forget any of the things that you do. So deal spreadsheet, new listing spreadsheet, new buyer spreadsheet. Then what I would talk about is going into like pendings, and this could all be on one thing, or one spreadsheet, but let's talk about like pendings. Now, like I just said, the pending buyer spreadsheet, that's just something where it's like, first thing, like buyer consultation. Then maybe the next thing is send the person who referred me the business a note card, or thank the referring party, I think is what it says in our office. So it'd be set up home search or buyer consultation, set up home search, thank the referring party, follow up with client on the home search. And then from there, it's, showing homes. But then now you would have a pending checklist. So now that you looked at homes, you wrote an offer and it went pending. So now you have another checklist. It's buyer pending checklist. We uploaded, all the contracts to the brokerage. We got this over to the title company. We got this over to the lender. But those are all on my checklist. It would say upload paperwork to brokerage, send paperwork to title company, send paperwork to lender. And it just keeps going. It would be schedule home inspection, receive disclosures from the seller, and you would just keep going. And then that's on that spreadsheet where you would have like the close of escrow date. You would have the date the contract was executed. You would have, when the inspection period's over. Like in our systems in Asana, I can click on any buyer's file and I can see at any time, I could see what was the date the contract was executed. When are we supposed to have the seller disclosures back per the contract? When is the inspection period over? When was what we call in Arizona the Benzer? That's when we initiate the repairs. When was that initiated? What's the date the seller has to respond? What's the date my client has to respond back? What's the close of escrow date? It goes over everything. It's, have we ordered the doormat? It's has the buyer signed? Have we got the disclosures from the lender? It's all very detailed. So like when my goal was, I used to do this myself. So remember, I'm going back to what he said I was unrelatable. So I wanted to go back and say, like, this is what I did in my offices. I would sit down for 30 minutes and just think, well, if I'm going to do this every single time I have a buyer, I'm going to do this every single time I have a listing, or every single time I have a deal, why would I even want to sit on defense? Meaning, like, I don't want to get stuff from my brokerage saying like, hey, this is what you've got to do. And I don't want to get stuff like, I don't want to be like, oh man, I forgot to put a lockbox on the property, or oh man, I forgot to order a sign, any of that stuff. So like, I'm just very proactive, and here's what you do next. And so like these get built. So like that was what I did. And then now you have a master, that's a master checklist. So that's the one that you edit every single time. And so when you think of like, oh, like anytime a mistake happens in our office on a transaction, I'll always tell my office, hey, figure out where we got to put that on the checklist to be on offense. Like if something happens and I'm like, oh man, if we would have just did this 6 days ago earlier, this would have never have happened. And that's how, from the initial checklist that I made, that's how they've been added to and built upon, is based on either a mistake happening where I was like, okay, we got to put that at that time. If we do it at that time, we're on offense, not defense. And for example, it wasn't long until I realized after a closing takes place, people would start asking me like, oh, Chris, like, where's the mailbox? And I'd be like, oh, like after that happens so many times, I thought, okay, we're going to have what's called an owner checklist. And if we're representing the buyer, we send that checklist to the listing agent. We say, hey, is there any way that you could get the owner to fill this out for us? Send it back or leave it on like the kitchen island. And it was stuff like, who's your landscaper and what mailbox number is theirs, things like that. And so like I got my clients would ask me these questions like, hey, what number are we the mailbox? And hey, can you call and ask who their landscaper or their pool guy is? And so I was like, okay, like I got that enough where we made a checklist. We put it on about 7 days before closing to send that to the listing agent and get that back. And cool, like that solved so many things. Or get this, about 2 days before the closing, our clients, and I'm going back 17 years ago, like 2 days before the closing, buyers would be like, hey, Chris, do you have the utilities numbers so that we can get the utilities set up? Right. Well, that makes sense. Like that's the day, about 2 to 3 days before they're starting to think utilities. So we already set it up that about 7 to 10 days, I think on our checklist, it says email the client all their utilities. So we have an actual templated email. If you go into Gmail, you can make templated emails. Like you write it one time, and you push template and you name the template. And so I wrote these, my assistants added on to them, but these are already done emails. So it'll say in our checklist, send the utility email. So she'll send that to them, and it'll be subject line utilities. And then it'll be a whole email that's already been written. She doesn't have to write it again. And it'll tell them it'll tell them how they need to switch the utilities. Here's their utility companies with the links to it. We've requested from the owner these things, and that's what's on that checklist that we send to the owner and the listing agent. But we're just trying to be proactive. You can see we're we want great customer service. So now that's where we probably get a lot of referrals, because we're not on defense. We're on offense for all of this stuff. So we try to always think of what's the client thinking next and do it for them. We hey, here this is, so that when they get done with the process, they give us a review that's hey, Bowers' crew, they had it all put together. They know what's up, right? And so that's the kind of stuff that we're doing. That's the kind of stuff that I was thinking of when I was putting these systems together. So another one, let's get outside of spreadsheets for a bit, and let's get into some other systems for a solo agent. But a buyer intake form, every time you talk to a new buyer, let's say you get referred to, your friend refers you to their friend, and they give you their number. A buyer intake form, if you're going to talk to a buyer on the phone all the time, that's your job, is finding buyers and sellers, finding people who want to buy homes and people who want to sell homes. That's what you do every single day. That's what you're looking for. Make this simple. So have intake form. So buyer intake form, a list of questions that you ask every time. Just think of if you go to certain places, I went to go get, new contacts last week, and I have this form I got to fill out. Or if I go to the doctor, I got a form I got to fill out. Almost anywhere I go, I went to the gun range last week, a form I got to fill out. Everywhere you go, they've got these forms. And some of them are forms things that they need. And some of them are actual personal information on people, because that's how they keep in contact with their clientele. So a buyer intake form, it would be good to know, just follow this checklist. Now, you don't have to be robotic and say, hey, I'm filling out a checklist. You probably could. But as you're on the phone with these people and having a natural conversation, you could be looking at this checklist, and you could be just saying hey, when you moved, do you have a home to sell, or are you renting? And they're oh, we're renting. Check the box rent. And then the next thing would say, when's their lease expire? Say, oh, well, when does your lease expire? Fill that out. Oh, July 31st, 2023. Okay. And have you talked to a lender? No. And then you just keep going. Okay, well, what are you looking for in a house? This is a buyer intake form that I just know I got to get through this. And then when I get off the phone with them, I have everything I need from them to take this to the next step. I put this in their file. That's now the notes on them. And so a seller intake form, same thing. When a seller calls you and says, hey, I want to sell my house, maybe it's a referral, or let's say it's a past client. Past client calls you and they're hey, Chris, I want to sell my house. And we just go through another checklist. Hey, can I ask you what's the reason you're selling? Hey, I remember I sold you that house about 4 years ago and you bought it for this, but what's roughly your loan payoff right now? Okay, where are you going to go whenever you move, or whenever you sell it? And you can see where I'm going through a cadence of questions. Now I'll schedule the appointment and meet them, but that's a seller intake form. Why you're doing that is because you want to get your business operating to where someone can take over doing certain jobs. So when I said that I have a few people that help me, some of the stuff are things that they would fill out for me now. So just think, if somebody was calling into your office, you might be thinking this isn't going to happen. People only know my cell phone number. Let's say they were calling into an office and there was someone that was hey, this is Christy with the Bowers team. How can I help you? And they're hey, we're thinking about selling our house. Is Chris there? Do you know what? He's actually out in the field right now, whatever, in another appointment with a client. And, but look, yeah, let me ask a few questions. They could just take that form over right there, and they could actually fill out that form for me, ask those questions. I could come into the office, look at that form, call up my client, be hey, I saw that Christy left this on my desk and looks like you're ready to sell. And I would just kind of recap it. And I could be done right there because I have all the data. They want to sell their house. They call me. I've got the data, schedule the appointment, go meet them. When I go meet them, then I come back. I've got my, my spreadsheet for a new listing. I do that, put it on the market. Then after that, it goes under contract. Then I would use my spreadsheet, my listing pending spreadsheet, do that. They close, we're done. So you could see where I'm taking this from. Like, think this through is when a lead comes in, intake form. Then you've got, the meetings that you do with them. And then you've got now a checklist for putting their house on the market. And then you got a checklist for when you get a contract on it. And that's how you finally get more systematized. So those are like intake forms. Those are buyer intake forms, seller intake forms. Now you could have a VIP questionnaire that could be on paper, or probably more importantly, now you can make a Google form. If you don't know what Google forms are, Google it. Like, go on YouTube and watch it. You're going to find all other avenues that you could be using these for. It's how we do certain things in our office's Google form. So for example, you could make a Google form and you could say name, email address, spouse's name, spouse's email address, phone numbers, current address, favorite restaurant, favorite sports teams. You could go through all of that stuff, and like any client that you have on your checklist, let's say like a new buyer pending checklist, you could say send out that form and you email it to them. They fill it out, you get it back, and then it gives you notes on all of their favorite stuff. So like if they say their favorite team is the Cowboys, then you could have things categorized in your database that you could always click on all the people who love the Cowboys. When they win on Sunday, you could just reach out to those people. You can see where this can get pretty cool as you grow. But once again, I'm taking you back. So if you're a solo agent right now, or just have one person, you're like, man, Chris, I don't know what systems that I would be, like I hear people are systematic, they're putting systems in place. This is what it looks like. It's sit down. And for me, it was just open up a tab on a spreadsheet, just write the steps of everything I got to do, save that. And then that's the master file. Then the next time I get a buyer, I would just open up that master file, copy it, make a new one, and I'd start working off that one. And then as things happen in the transaction, I was like, oh, I should add that. I would add it to the actual file that I was working on that client. Then I'd go add it to the master file so that the next time I copied that, I had a new version of it, because I looked at that and that was a new version of that spreadsheet. That was a new version of my business. So I was always looking to try to figure out how I could add certain things into my business. So that's today's show, guys. That was just, systems for the solo agent. I have more systems than somebody would probably ever want. Like if you looked in the back end of my, if you looked on my Google Drive, you would see checklists, spreadsheets. We run very well as a business. I always look at things and say we shouldn't have to communicate a lot in a day. We should just be able to go somewhere and see what's going on. And we're still building onto them. We still need to build to grow to the next level. But I just wanted to explain to you how these systems were built. I think something that would be important to note too before I check out is these systems are, if you listen to the podcast a few weeks ago, Dave Zajenski was on and he was talking about things that are important but not urgent. And that's what systems would be. They're important, but they're not urgent. They're not an inspection, date. They're not meeting a client for a consultation. So they're very easy to brush off to the side and say, hey, this isn't important. Like this, whether I get this done tonight or not isn't my reputation on the line. No, none of my clients or anybody know that this has to be done. And so we just brush it off when things like that don't need to be done. But when something's important but not urgent, that's something that you've got to figure out why you're doing it. And I would do it at nighttime, and I was probably 22, and I would do these at nighttime, and I would say like, hey, these are the systems that I got to put in place. But I'd have to say, unless you're closing a lot of transactions, you probably have an hour or two in the day that you can put these together. And they were important, but not urgent. But I knew that if I built those systems, every transaction that I did, every deal that I did would be easier and easier, because the more I got out of my brain, you got to think your brain right now, if you don't have any systems, your brain's storing all this. And whether you think it is or not, you're running out of memory in there. So it's going a little bit slower because you're at the light and you're at the red light. And, oh man, did I order that? Ooh, did I do that? Once you start using systems like this, your brain stops thinking of things before you go to bed. You don't think, did I do this? Because if you have these spreadsheets and you just look at them about an hour a day, it makes your day so much smoother when you sit down in your office and you're just like, okay, here's my listings, boom, 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 boom. Here's my buyers, boom, 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 boom. Like you're going through so systematically your day. You're looking at the checklist. You're like, oh, okay, I still need that for this client. You get on the phone with the listing agent. Hey, we still need this. I know. And you're like, I asked for this yesterday. Can you please send it? The next day, it's still there. It hasn't been done. You call the agent. Hey, I'm asking again for the third time. Could you please send this? But that's where like things don't fall through the cracks when you do this. Your clients are getting things very proactive because you're always on offense. But that's how you'd have systems for the solo agent. I have them. If you need some systems, reach out. In the show notes, you will see, you guys, you got my contact information. Somebody posted actually on one of their stories yesterday with, just an agent with another brokerage that I follow. And she had posted working on systems today. And I had messaged her and said, hey, which systems are you working on? And let me see if I can just send them to you. I thought, wow, if she was working on something that I already had done, I could just forward that to her in my Google Drive and she could be done. And so that's where, if you guys know me, I'm very giving of my system. So reach out to me if you're like, hey, I don't have something like this, or I need to see, kind of a framework so I can add on to mine or eliminate from mine. Reach out to me and I'll be happy to help. But that was today's show. I hope that was helpful. And I hope that you getting these systems in place will help you realize how you can get like your next person working for you or your next employee, because they just take over those systems. Once they take over those systems, the game is over. You probably never look back. So I hope you guys all enjoy your day. And I hope this podcast today was helpful for you.